Despite the fact that I theorized that Izuku would lose One for All by the end of the series since maybe Season 2, seeing him being told to let go of One for All for the first time was still a shocking moment. We spent almost a decade watching this boy train and struggle to become the hero he always wanted to be, to the point where I don't even see One for All as All Might's power anymore. No, One for All is Izuku's quirk, and he's continuing to prove why he's the perfect successor. But let's take a step back. As always, I'll go through the episode and break it down mostly in order. If you're new here, hi, I am Jam, and I've read the entire Emichi manga, but don't worry, I won't spoil any of the future events. I am here to review the episodes just as they are, because even if I know the end of the story, I am still experiencing the anime adaptation for the first time, just like all of you. With all of that said, let's begin. After spending the first 4 episodes mostly with Bakugo and All Might, we finally go back to see how our protagonist is doing in his own battle. But before that, we get a glimpse of the planning stage, where we see the Coffin in the Sky squad discussing just why exactly Shigaraki is the main target, why he's even more dangerous than All for One. All for One wanted to rule, he wanted people to look at him. He was a monster, but there was some logic to his plans. Shigaraki, on the other hand, just wants to destroy, and we see how far that desire goes when he starts aiming his destruction not just at heroes or at other people, but at the very foundation of the country. And that's who Izuku now has to face alone, since the initial plan went sideways. On a brighter note, it was so disorienting to see all these characters so clean and not beat up and on the verge of death. Edgeshot is still tall, Mirko still has most of her limbs, Bakugo is still standing, the others are still conscious, Izuku is still able to breathe and looks like his normal sweet self instead of like a demon. Well, you get the idea. After the opening, we see a quick glimpse of the evacuation center. I think it's a great thing that we occasionally cut away from the action to see them, because it reminds the viewers what our characters are fighting for in the first place. Also, it's always emotional to see the parents. In the previous episodes, we saw Bakugo's parents, and now we switch to Izuku's mom. Before I talk about any specific plot points, I want to talk about the general quality of the episode. While it didn't reach the heights of the earlier episodes, this episode was still great. There were some moments with insanely smooth animation, and there were some great individual shots where the team got pretty creative. This part of the story had a lot of dialogue and not too much action, so there was a risk that when these chapters got animated to screen, the episode could have ended up a bit slow and boring, but it was precisely because of those creative shots that the episode was still engaging, even with all the dialogue and exposition. Plus, we got a few new tracks for this episode, and Emichi's soundtrack is always great and adds a lot to any scene. I also want to address the criticism about the fact that this episode used CGI. I actually think that the CGI blended in pretty well here. Personally, I didn't find it distracting at all. Plus, animating those larger scale panels with CGI meant that the team could give more attention to character art. And given that the personal conflict was the core of this episode, nailing character art was much more important than spending time on animating those large-scale shots fully in 2D. But let's go back to talking about specific plot points. It was great how quickly this fight went to shit. We were less than 5 minutes into the episode, And that's including the opening, when Danger Sense got stolen. And out of all the quirks that Shigaraki could have grabbed in that moment, Danger Sense was definitely one of the most inconvenient options for us. It was also a great detail how for Shigaraki, Danger Sense is visualized as red lightning, while for Deku it was always yellow. Next, Shigaraki sends Deku right to the Mount Fuji, and Deku's mask doesn't survive this attack. It was so sweet that Izuku's first thought wasn't about losing a pretty important piece of gear, but about how this mask was the one that All Might made sure to find and give him back after he'd lost it. In terms of the themes, it comes back later in this episode with One for All itself. Izuku sees everything he'd received from All Might as precious gifts, from something seemingly insignificant like a mask to something as important as a quirk. Another great thing about this scene is that the location change isn't just for aesthetics, but it also increases the stakes significantly. Decay reaching Mount Fuji and causing an eruption would mean a massive catastrophe. So not only does Deku has to fight Shigaraki in the poor state that he is already in, but he also has to be mindful of his surroundings. This episode literally started with the team talking about how surroundings aren't a factor in this war anymore. But that was while we were still talking about buildings and not about a whole volcano. Here we also get the whole conversation about Shigaraki's humanity and him being destruction incarnate, not just a mere successor of Alpha One. I love how Shigaraki thinks about Spinner here. That literally shows his humanity despite everything he's doing. Yes, Shigaraki is a monster, but at the same time he's still a person. A person who likes gaming, a person who thinks of a friend in the middle of the battle. By the way, the show absolutely nailed the panel of Shigaraki enjoying the destruction he's causing. If I had to criticize something, then it's the fact that Delaware Smash moment didn't have the same impact for me as it did in the manga. That panel in the manga was insanely impressive, but not only did the anime remove the perspective, they didn't even have a close-up of Deku in that moment. I am not saying this moment was bad, but I expected just a bit more. But I think that for people who are anime-onlys, this moment still should have been pretty hype. After that, we get a pretty intense action sequence. I love how this episode continued playing with lighting and colors. Just like Danger Sense turned from yellow to red, Smokescreen also looked a different color due to gear shift being applied to it. Also, Shigaraki dodging Deku's attacks in that smoke was animated very smoothly. Another great thing is that the second we think that Izuku's plan is working and that he might get the upper hand, the show reminds us that no, Shigaraki has Search, which is a perfect counter to Izuku's plan here. And to make things worse, gear shift finally runs out and the recoil kicks in, which makes Izuku unable to breathe properly and, what's even worse, unable to move without the help of Black Whip. Next, we continue the discussion about trying to save Tenko versus simply defeating Shigaraki. Like I said before, the anime made some really great decisions to avoid dialogue-heavy moments turning out boring, even like adding the small detail of Shigaraki cracking his fingers one by one as he spoke. One of the most emotional parts of the episode was Nana telling Izuku to give up on Shigaraki. That's her grandson. We know how difficult it must be for her to say something like this. Her speech was great, about Izuku's philosophy facing the highest wall it possibly could, and that wall being something that Izuku didn't need to climb over. But just like Bakugo refused to fall until the battle was truly won, the same way Izuku refuses to give up without trying. He's Deku who always does his best. He's Deku who refuses to give up on people. And it was enough to convince even someone like Kudo to help. He went from being the one who opposed Izuku the most to now being the one who supports him the most. It's one of the many examples of how Izuku impacts people around him. Here we get the most important part of this episode. Kudo telling Izuku, let go of one for all. I think I don't even need to elaborate on the importance of this scene. And putting those words over the image of All Might telling Izuku he can be a hero for the first time was just an evil but beautiful cherry on top. It was also great how we jumped to see All Might, who's struggling to stay conscious, yet he's still crawling towards where he feels the battle is, because he can sense that one for all, this power spun together by everyone, is now beginning to unravel. I also love that in an indirect way, Star and Stripe helped with this plan. She was in the story for an absurdly short time, so it's very important that the impact she had is felt even now, a whole season later. It makes her sacrifice feel even more meaningful than it already was. We see Izuku and the Vestiges talk about the plan more. I absolutely adored how Kudo explained his plan by giving Bakugo as an example. A very much needed moment of levity in this highly emotional and painful moment. I also like how this concept that one for all can be passed on forcibly was brought up in Season 2, and then it was never mentioned again up until now. It really makes it seem like this ending was planned from the beginning, because otherwise, why even mention that one for all can be passed on forcibly? I'll admit that I wish that it was Izuku himself who came up with this idea, but out of all the other characters, I think that Kudo is the second best option. As everyone points out, this plan is too crazy and too risky, and yet it's Kudo, the man who voted for simply killing Shigaraki, who now proposes to gamble on Izuku just because his determination was so great it even managed to change Kudo. It's true that MHA has a massive cast, and yet every character is handled so gracefully. Even a literal ghost can get a character arc here. The final scene of the episode is Izuku accepting the plan and transforming into what looks like a demon from hell. Shigaraki himself comments that he doesn't look like a hero anymore. I love how multi-layered this part is. On the surface level, Deku simply looks cool, so let's get that out of the way first. The second layer is more mechanical. Currently, Izuku can't move, so wrapping his muscles up in Black Whip is the only way he can continue fighting. And even those claws probably could deal some damage. And lastly, the main layer is symbolic. From the very beginning, this story presented the ideas of what is a hero and what is a villain. In the world of MHA, these concepts turned into something superficial. Villains, or even villainous-looking people, stopped being seen and treated as human, while heroes turned into performers and the society began worshipping them. But real life isn't black and white, and the profession of a hero isn't as glamorous as people used to think. It's emphasized precisely by Deku's current villainous form, when in reality he's the greatest hero. There's also a more personal symbolism here. Izuku used to look up to All Might, he wanted to become just like him and save people with a smile. Over the course of the series, we saw Izuku grow into his own hero, someone who's still directly influenced by All Might, but also different in some ways. Izuku isn't smiling now. He looks scary. He doesn't inspire the same comfort in people's hearts as All Might used to. And yet, no one can deny that Deku is still a hero. He's simply expanding that concept, which is reflected in how he looks. I also like that while his form is similar to how he looked in Season 6 during Dark Hero arc, the context is a bit different. Back then, he simply wasn't taking care of himself. But here, this form is a more active choice. Being self-sacrificial is still the biggest flaw of Izuku as much as it is his strength, but in Season 6, his sacrifices during the Dark Hero arc felt almost pointless, like he was stuck in his own mind with his dark thoughts and didn't see the bigger picture. But here, in Season 8, the sacrifices he's making feel like they are coming from a clear mind. What he's doing is still crazy, but at the very least it's clear and purposeful. And speaking of crazy, let's go back to episode 2, when we saw Nana tell All For One that All Might would defeat him because Toshinori is even crazier than All For One. While it didn't happen in a literal sense, it's happening through All Might's successors. Bakugo was the one who defeated All For One's physical body, and Bakugo was crazy from the start. Deku is someone who looks sweet on the outside, but when you truly analyze his actions, he's probably even crazier than the other two. So, once again, his current dark form reflects that a bit. But those were my final thoughts about this week's episode. Thank you for listening. Please share your own thoughts in the comments. And if you are interested, you can subscribe, and I'll see you next week for the review of episode 6.